Welcome to the relationship design part of the leadership section. We're going to dive right in, minimize my face, and go into the metaphor for relationship design. The best way to describe this for two scenarios, whether it's your existing firm where there are like new people joining your firm, the metaphor is like, you know, you've got a new limb that's joining the family, this whole body of yours, or if you've got people that have been there for many years and they've changed, you may need to redesign that relationship in your firm. And in this instance, with sustainability, they might have existing operational duties that they have. And now there's this whole new thing that they have to start doing. It needs to be redesigned, because with this metaphor here, when you get like a new arm or something new is happening, you have to figure out what's the best way for this now to work, for you to best utilize this arm, and how will you move so that the arm doesn't break. So everything needs to kind of readjust and sort of be redesigned in order to be optimized. Just like what you have to do with your organizations. So to understand it, relationship design is about engineering the relationship or relationship as a whole, whether it's one-on-one or as a group, at the start to be successful moving forward. But at the same time, like what I mentioned earlier, is that you might have an existing organization and you're redesigning that relationship because something new has happened. So there are two parts of relationship design. The first part is about the spirit of the relationship. What is this whole thing about? And specifically what the needs are for this to work well. So when it comes to spirit of the relationship, you're asking questions like really simple stuff. What are we both here for? What's our common ground? What's a win-win look like? Why are you here? Why am I here? And at the same time, paraphrasing to see if you both understand each other correctly. So the tip here that we have is to accept where they're coming from. So you might have created a sustainability workforce or committee, and someone comes along and says, I'm here because the boss told me to. It might not be the answer that you want to hear, but that might just be the reality. You need to work with that truth and go, okay, someone who might not be completely committed to this is being forced to be here, but at least I know, and I know how to work with it. And you might come here and say, well, that's clear, and this is sort of what I would like to have. It would have been really cool if you're a bit more committed, but that's okay. I just want to get it done. I'm assuming that that's what you want too, so you can kind of get back to what you were doing. And they go, yes or no. Right? So the idea is just to sort of mark out the common ground. Like, where do we see eye to eye that we could double down on and say, from now on, this is sort of where we're going to work from. Because if I can't expect you to work from a place that you're not even in, or you can't get access to because you haven't bought in, or you don't have permission to, you just don't want to be there. So start with the common ground. That's what the spirit of the relationship is trying to achieve, articulating what you're both there for. And then number two, the needs of the relationship. So what are we not saying, but really should? What do we do when it doesn't work? And that's incredibly important, because you're now marking the boundaries. And you might have someone who could be really committed, but is not very organized, or is just overloaded, but they're a part of the workforce or a part of the value chain where the sustainability work needs to happen. You need to find out, well, what to do at the start and say, hey, look, you've agreed to do this, but if you're too busy or if it doesn't happen, what do we do? And then you can open that up so that they can bring ownership to the discussion. What do we do when it doesn't work? This is important to talk about, because you're designing contingencies in case it doesn't happen. And more often than not, there will be, especially when it's group work, you won't get everybody doing the same amount of work at the same level of quality or the same level of commitment. Even if they're committed, but they're just too busy because they were just thrown into this, and the workplace hasn't readjusted their workload, but they've just got an extra thing to do. Well, what do you do then? So it's important to talk about that at the start so that it doesn't stop the whole thing 2-3 months from now. Next question is, what would make this work really well? I think that's pretty straightforward. They could say, hey, we're going to need some resources, or I need a bit of time, or I like to communicate this way. And that assumes that you have people who can say those things. If you're working with juniors or people who don't know how to answer that question, you may need to ask a bit further and get a little bit more curious about the person or people. What are your boundaries? So this one's pretty straightforward. So where is it not okay to be sending you emails and things? And you see how this is not just about sustainability. It's about designing a really good organizational culture and relationships. like I said, commercially beneficial, regardless of sustainability or not. And the tips here is, number one, to ensure each party is paraphrasing. That means you're saying in your own words what they said so that they can correct you, give you that feedback loop right away. And they go, no, not like that, more like this. And you go, good thing we talked about that now, or else I would have been under the complete wrong assumption. And number two, it's about optimizing the relationship for the future. So clearing the path so that you and everybody else using that path in the future have a smooth road to walk on, a good relationship to work off. And of course, that means that you're marking out where the common ground starts and ends so that when you're playing ball, you're on the same field. And if it hasn't occurred to you yet, you'll realize that relationship design is about communicating what's interpreted. So as much as you're telling each other things, you're active listening. So you're coming back, you're listening to it, and then you're paraphrasing, you're rephrasing, you're saying their words to make sure that you're actually on the same page. So the best way to do that is actually to show you with a commercial HR tool, let's say, called KPQs and KPIs, which force you and your team member to do relationship design. So let's hop on over to that template. So here is the template. I thought instead of making slides, I'll show you the actual worksheet because this is the link to the doc that you're actually going to get later. So it's a practice to figure out what your KPQs, which are key performance questions, and your KPIs are. And KPIs are more well known, key performance indicators. They're things like your targets and your metrics to know that you're on track. Almost everybody has them, like, how much content you got to be producing per week or your sales target. It's pretty straightforward. The issue is that we have a lot of KPIs, but not nearly enough KPQs. The practice of KPQs is to formulate, not just for the employer, but for the team member, what strategically are they there for? So it forces ownership in their role. And the exercise is an exercise between the leader or the supervisor and the employee. And typically it goes both ways. There's like two KPQs, but I'm not going to confuse you. We're going to talk about the one, which is of the person in the role trying to gauge their performance and assess how well are they doing in accordance to the strategy. So I'm going to dive into the example and I'll come back and give to the guiding tips because I think that'll be much faster. So here we're talking about my trampoline business in Phnom Penh. Accelerator was our business and operations manager. And so before we did this exercise together, I kind of thought about what the KPQ would be before I went in. But I wanted her to figure out her own KPQ. So she had to be forced to think, well, how well am I doing my job? And how would I phrase this question? How do I know I'm on track? So to what extent is Accelerator ensuring that Fly Phnom Penh is efficiently operating at a safe and profitable capacity? So that pretty much sums up as an ops manager what I would be as the owner expecting her to be doing. So then we come into the KPIs. Now I'll tell you that it's a bit tricky because a million things come up sometimes. So first things that came to mind for me and for her in that role were things like her programs. Like, hey, we need to be pushing team building and school bookings and all these bigger ticket ideas. And I was thinking, hold on, that feels quite tactile and not quite strategic. I needed to zoom out and think, what is all that a part of? And it was a part of making sure that there was growth, like revenue growth. That's really what I was worried about. So that's like NPS or NPR score, where customers give you like customer feedback and they give you 10 or 9 out of 10. And there's enough research to show that when that happens, there is some level of growth in your company because they tell other customers about it. And that's all encompassing because it's all my programs, it's walking customers. So I was like, okay, that's the main number I need to know per week, that she's not overspending her budget. And of course, safety is first, wanting to make sure that the accidents and incidents are less than 1 per month. So when I, as a co-owner, get really busy, she can tell me these things and I know, okay, you're on track and you're doing your job well. So she had to write that in her own words, and we went back and forth a few times in order for us to get here. Now, here are the tips to formulating that. The first thing across both KPIs and KPQs is not to use jargon, because remember back in the clarity of vision video, that just adds more noise and more things to decode and encode in that communication channel. So keep it simple. Right. Number 2 is to frequently assess them. In the beginning, you're going to do that a lot. And then further on, probably once a quarter, once a month with the changes in your KPIs and KPQs as you meet milestones and targets. Don't be afraid to kill your darlings. What that means is not to fall in love with your first draft, because your first drafts are never perfect. So you're going to be constantly iterating until you get to something that resonates and like, yeah, that's the one. That's how I know you're on track and doing your job. And of course, to align with your supervisor, or in this case, if you are the leader, you probably still have some kind of governance. So you want to send it to the board to make sure that, yeah, that is exactly what that position, not that person, is supposed to be doing. So that is, in short, what the KPQ and KPI is about. The benefits here are that you are getting that person, your team member, to self-articulate their job purpose. So ownership, they self-assess their performance, and they self-correct as they're doing those reviews. So it saves a lot of time, and again, it forces accountability and ownership. It's a wonderful tool to be using. Going back to the slides. So from that exercise, you probably picked up 3 things that are needed: active listening from both ends, intention, you're bringing your intention, you're being forced to think about what this thing that you're trying to accomplish is about, and of course humility, because it takes a lot of space and a lot of openness to say, oh, interesting, maybe I'm not communicating very well because they're not coming back with what I think that they think their job is about. So those are the 3 things. So if you can do that well, you can start designing a culture of excellence that your team wants. Well, you and your team. It goes both ways, right? And just remember that if you don't do that, you're defaulting into a culture that might not serve you because you're not bringing intention and discussion into it. So here's an assignment. Just to consider what relationships that you need to nurture and potentially redesign. They could be personal as well as professional, because it's a life skill to develop. Some questions for you to think about with that is what comes to mind. So which relationships intuitively in your heart that you're thinking, should probably work on that one. It's an important client or an important colleague, or she's my mother, I don't know, whatever it is. Use this opportunity to do that. So on that note, I wish you the best of luck with relationship design. We are open, so you can send us direct messages with questions on how you're going to approach this, especially when they're feeling sensitive, you might be feeling nervous. We are here to help. So put in the direct messages and we'll help answer some of these questions for you.